Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special guest with us today, Austin Ochs, who's the CEO of Capital 3, which is a family business holding company. If Ochs sounds familiar, you're not crazy. If you're a frequent listener to the show, his father, Pete, has been on the show a couple of times. And one of the things we love doing is a lot of the people listening to this are in family businesses, and to hear from, a next gen leader and the good, bad, and the ugly that comes with that. Nobody's got all that figured out, but it's just really a lot of fun to hear the story, and you're going to be real blessed to hear Austin's story today. So, Austin, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, Austin, we always try to start with a little context of our guests. So, tell us what it was like growing up in the Ochs family.
It was a good family and a good growing up, and I'm super thankful for that. My parents have been fantastic, married for many years, and I had a sister who was 2.5 years younger than me. So it was the four of us and my family growing up, and so obviously very entrepreneurial father. So I grew up in kind of that vein. So that was kind of put into me at an early age. I tell the story often. I can remember having a day off of school, less than 10, and I was taken along on a business trip with financials in my lap, and I was getting the full P&L rundown at that point. So sometimes I say I didn't have a choice of my profession,
right.
But I think I did at the end of the day. So I had a great family of faith. The four of us were really close, had extended grandparents that were nearby, and so come from just a long and solid on both sides of my mom and my dad's family. Just great people and faith-driven people. And so I really kind of stand on the shoulders of a lot of, my family that came before me.
Yeah. I mean, we've had lots of people. Your story is kind of similar to mine and sort of a stable upbringing of a faithful family. But there are plenty of people, guests we've had, that haven't done that and have kind of redeemed their background,
Absolutely.
Both are valid and different kinds of testimonies. But you are standing on the shoulders of folks that are already faithful. But that comes with its own set of challenges and assumptions, you know what I mean? And if you're like me, you kind of had to work through those. And at some point, do I believe all this stuff for myself? That kind of thing. Did that manifest itself for you at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I did have a solid foundation, but at the end of the day, I think you're spot on. You've got to own it for yourself, right? And I think you go through, I felt like I had some real challenges probably in the high school era, and then even through college. There were real faith builders for me just as I was transitioning out of kind of that family bubble to, being my own adult, right? And so there was definitely moments that were faith testing and faith clarifying moments for me, right? And so I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I know you spent a lot of time at Kanakuk. Did you go to that camp as a kid?
I did. I was there from about 10 to 15, played a lot of basketball growing up. And so I kind of was jumping into the full-time, basketball all the time program. And so ended up stopping going there. And I actually went on a missions trip with the owner of Kanakuk, called Joe White is his name. And we were flying back on an airplane from work that he was doing in Haiti. And he goes, "Hey, you should work at camp next year." And I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." And so he called me about January in my dorm room and said, "Hey, you haven't signed up." And I said, "Oh, I have to do that, don't I?" And he said, let's interview right on the phone. And next thing I knew, I had a job offer for the summer. So I stayed for four years all through college and loved it so much I actually stayed on for 5 more post college. So I had a great 9 years of being in that. And I think that's actually super transformational towards my journey because I described myself as having a business head, I think, from my upbringing and
Yeah.
the family business, quote unquote. But I also, God was really, I think, even to what we were just talking about, I think my faith became my own through high school and really through my Kanakuk experience. And I saw really godly men loving, serving, discipling. And so that was also really embedded in me. And I think the call of just personal holiness, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
you deny yourself and how you choose a road that is not necessarily the world's road. And
Mm-hmm.
that calling really landed squarely with me. And so it was transformational for my spiritual walk and for my own development. And so when I ended up joining my dad, God had been kind of pulling him from just the business world, quote unquote, into this idea of how do we merge these two worlds. And when I was graduating college, that wasn't, today it's much more popular. There's a lot of,
Yeah.
faith-driven type initiatives that are popular. But when I was graduating college, that wasn't necessarily the case.
Mm-mm.
And so I think my question was, do I go be a pastor or do I go back to the family business and hang out with my dad? And I really wrestled with that decision.
That is such a great point, that this whole literally faith-driven movement, the faith-driven nonprofit that Henry Kasner, who's been on here, has really done a great job leading with Justin Foreman and that kind of thing. They've really sort of coined that term, and have brought a lot of energy and resources and bringing people together around that. But you're right, 20 years ago, that wasn't really happening much. I mean, I know
The idea that you could do both in one place, what wasn't an option.
right. So it was like when you were kind of coming up professionally, it was like, well, this is the way I thought of it. Even half a generation or a generation ahead of you is like, my dad was a business guy who became a pastor. It's like, you got to pick. The way I thought, if you're all in for God, then you're a pastor, a missionary, whatever. Okay. Or you're a business person who basically is a good person, goes to church and supports the people doing the heavy lifting. But you're not in ministry. Nobody ever told me the business guy was in, you know what I mean? Can you talk about like the evolution of your thinking in that?
So not to throw my alma mater under the bus, but I will tell a funny contextual story to this, is that I went to Wheaton College. I played basketball there. And overall, it was a great thing for me. A funny thing I didn't see coming was I knew that I wanted to come back and work with my dad. Therefore, I knew I needed a business major. So that's what I did. The surprising point at Wheaton to me was if you were studying pre-med, everybody was like, well, you're going to become a doctor and you're going to help people, and that's super biblical. There's a lot of missionaries, biblical studies, like all of those things were like, man, those are really God ordained, professions and ways you can help people. And then it was kind of like, psst, there's the business people who just want to change money in the temple, right?
Wow.
It literally kind of felt like, man, if I was a business, now the business department didn't feel this way, but outside the business department, I think there's a little bit of stigma that was kind of like, if we don't really know where you guys are at, and so I think that was part of it, right? Was even then that wasn't the thing. So, I did have a business professor that used to say good laws outlast good men. And so when my dad and I started working together and he started saying, man, I really am feeling this sense of we can combine these two things. And that's when I said, man, we have to write this stuff down so that we have a North Star that we refer to often, people see, and ultimately when Pete's not there or Austin's not there on a, in life or in a daily basis, someone has something to point to that. And so we did that. And what I say today is I think a lot of people, I've heard people try to parse it out like, well, I'm 51% ministry and 49% business.
Yeah, that didn't work.
Right.
100% both, right? Like
that's exactly what my thought has been. I'm like, we're 100% about business. Like we have a platform that is delivering a product that is a high quality, product, and people rely on us for that. That's our job. And at the same time, we do it in a very spiritually aligned, spiritually sensitive. We're using that platform to fulfill our purpose, which is ultimately the most important thing. So, that's been a journey for us to figure that out, almost 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And it takes, I think it goes a lot slower than most people.
Yes.
Sometimes people don't believe it or don't want to start it because they go, well, you guys are so far, you're so advanced, I could never be there. And I think my encouragement for everybody listening is you just got to start with something small and you got to let God grow it. And pretty soon you'll look back and go, wow, that's amazing. But I think the mindset of I can be both, I'm called to be both, is really important.
Couldn't agree more. And I think, well, Billy Graham, famous everywhere, but also at Wheaton, said, before he died, said, he thought the next big movement of God would be in the business world. And I think that was super prophetic, because I know there's a groundswell. I mean, including this podcast, the appetite for this podcast has really surprised us. There is an appetite for having this discussion, which is exactly, I think, what you're talking about. We're just trying to tell stories of how are other people doing it. There's no two the same, as we were talking about before we started recording. We're not trying to prescribe anything, but I think those two worlds are beginning to meet. It is getting more normalized. At least there's more examples, and I think you guys have really been ahead of the game on that. And so I think it's really interesting to see how you've navigated it. And I know, again, we're not trying to hold your family up as the perfect example. There is none. We're all, trying to figure this out still. But can you kind of take us through this? I think this is going to be really helpful for older guys like me to hear the story of you. And of course, Cale, who's now the president of our company, a similar age and background and that sort of thing. But some of the folks like me and your dad and other people, maybe a little bit older, we have some preconceived notions of how we want things to go. And I think it's super helpful, maybe for your generation, to be hearing about, your perspective, some of the struggles you've had in taking over some of this leadership. And then, but I also think I think it helps your peers, but I also think it helps a generation ahead. Oh, maybe that's how the next gen is thinking. Even for me, even though Cale's not my son, I want to be able to serve him in a way that's more helpful to the way he's thinking. So you might just start sharing some of that journey, how you got into the business and whatever stories you think would be helpful here.
Yeah. So I came from Kanakuk we actually owned a company that built external signs. So think the McDonald's golden arches out front.
Oh, yeah.
That was in Wichita. And so I got recruited into that company by the general manager, which was kind of great that, a lot of people had said, hey, don't go work for your dad right away, even though you're in the business. And so I think that was a good little tidbit of wisdom. And so that's what happened. I came back in August of 2008. And if you've been around a while, you recall that in about October of 2008, things got pretty hairy.
Yeah.
So I had doubled my meager ministry salary from working at Kanakuk, and then 2 months later, they cut everybody's salary in half, and I was like, back to where we started. And I was like, maybe I should have just stayed at
It's Kanakuk. A lot more fun out there in Missouri. Yeah.
And so I did that for about 2 years, and then we actually started a hedge fund. My dad had started a hedge fund in 2008. Great timing.
Wow.
The guy who was going to run that was there for about through 2008 and 2009 and said, this is a dead end. So I ended up taking that over for 2 years and running that. But I think one of the realizations I had was I wasn't in the operating businesses, and that's ultimately where I wanted to be. I think the second thing was that was kind of during the tenure of moral and leadership failures by a lot of public companies, and thought, we want to put our money in Main Street, kind of not Wall Street, and ultimately we want to be the stewards of our own capital and not rely on other people that may or may not kind of hold our same values. And so we shut that down. And so I kind of jumped into both. We had started Seat King at the time, which in 2010, which is a company that builds seats for lawnmowers. So the startup was kind of ongoing there in about 2012, 2013. And then we had purchased a company in 1994 called Electrex, which is an electrical wiring harness manufacturer to the ag, construction, utility industries, for all the kind of vehicles that support those industries. And so I kind of jumped in a continuous improvement role in about 2012, 2013, and 2014, kind of took over sales and marketing. And then in 2017, took over as CEO. So it's been quite a journey. And really since 2017, the last 6-7 years for us have been really challenging. We've worked really, really hard, and yet they've been really, really fruitful. So, obviously COVID, we actually my COO got really sick in 2019. So we navigated some leadership and health issues, which were really problematic towards the business. And that created a lot of tension between my dad and I as we were going kind of through the beginning of what was becoming the transition for us. So we had to navigate that right before COVID, and that was actually a hidden blessing for us because we totally reorged the business from top to bottom. And then we hit COVID, and Seat King almost went under because it's a very seasonal business. Everybody, as you know, is buying lawnmower seats in the spring. They're not buying them in the winter.
Yeah.
So that hit right before the big selling cycle of Seat King. And so we were on the ropes. We ended up pivoting and selling a lot of reusable medical gowns at the time. And that got us through kind of the dry season there. And so really our business has doubled since COVID in both companies. And so extreme growth, performance has improved, but it's been a challenging ride. And then kind of through the middle of that, also completed the buyout with my dad. So a lot of stuff going on.
So as you look back at that, and I know you're still doing it. I mean, your dad's still got a lot of energy. He's not. He's really. What else can I say? I mean, he's still active, right? And likes being active. At least it looks like to me. And so, as you look back, if you were going to give, and we'll do kind of the practical tip at the end, kind of one or two things maybe as a recap. But when you go through that, what for your own journey, what were some of the positives and negatives? I mean, did you feel like it kind of moved at the right pace? I mean, you kind of have to move at whatever pace things are coming at you. But maybe what are some of the things that you kind of learned about if you were coaching other families? What would be some of the things that you'd tell them to, maybe a short list of things to do and a short list of things not to do?
Yeah. So one of the things that was a huge blessing and also a real big challenge is that my dad and I think visionarily are very much the same, and yet we're also different people, as everybody is, right? And then we were also very close. I mean, even when I was in college, I can remember, I think we usually would talk on a Sunday afternoon, and my dad would say, "Man, here's what's going on with the business," and he'd say, "What do you think?"
Right.
And I would, I didn't know what I was talking about, but I'd give him my thoughts, and then we'd talk next week and go, "You know what? I thought about that, and I did one of those things, and it worked. Thank you." And so he did a great job of bringing me into the business and sharing ownership and responsibility of the business, even when I wasn't working there.
Ooh, that's really good.
And so I highly recommend that. I think the challenge becomes as I took over as CEO in 2017 and was really running the businesses on a day-to-day basis. You have this challenge, I think, too, of just my time horizon, my risk appetite. I see opportunity, right? And yet the analogy I use is it's kind of his Ferrari and I'm driving it, right? And so at some point, especially when you run into challenges, as I alluded to in 2019, I call him and go, "Hey, we're stuck in a ditch." And he's going, "What are you doing stuck in a ditch with my Ferrari?" And not out of a sense of, not inappropriately, but it's his asset that I'm in charge of, right? And so you have those natural challenges. And so those become tough to navigate sometimes, and they bring stressors. We did not at the time, I think, have the best family business structure. And I just encourage everybody to think through that. There's actually a great resource I highly recommend. I unfortunately probably got it a little too late, but there's a book called The Family Business Handbook from Harvard Business Review that I think just does an amazing job of helping people structure family business, but also just family relationships, quite frankly. And so, we had a third party that got involved at one point and is still involved today that helps both of us kind of navigate our roles and our personalities, and that honestly was a lifesaver. I really highly recommend. I think sometimes you look at it and you're like, do we need to spend money? Do we, it takes time and energy. I think it's really worth it. So we had some bumps along the way and some big bumps, as all relationships do. And, I think the other good thing was, both of us had to, say we're sorry, back up, mend fences, but at the end of the day, we were both strong enough and grounded enough to, I think, come to the other side of it in a really healthy way. And, I'll experience it too. I think to be the pass off generation, that's a thing, especially when you're kind of first gen and you've been the guy that has started it from 0 to 1. That's a hard transition, especially when you've given your life's work and energy to it, right? So it's challenging.
Man, I just appreciate your sharing all of that, man. I really think this idea of sharing business stories and kind of asking for your 2 cents before you were in it, that's not intuitive and kind of genius in retrospect. That's really a cool idea. And then this whole thing, man, it's like, I guess somebody did write the handbook, if you will, that you referenced, and we'll try to find that and put a show in send me that link if you find it easily, and we'll put it in the show notes. But I think even with a handbook, you got to apply, right? It's like reading a textbook. You got to apply. If you got a physics textbook and you got a physical problem to solve, you still got to do the math on your problem. And so I just appreciate the transparency about how hard it is. I just think we can't understate it. And I think kind of your aligned vision and values, and then kind of that relationship capital that you'd already built up, seems like it really helped you through those things, and will continue to, because you're going to continue. I mean, as long as he's involved, you got to navigate, who's
That's right.
And who allocates capital, and, so anyway, I just think that's crazy challenging. Anything else that you want to share on the kind of family business side of things? Maybe from a next gen person's thing, what are some things that maybe somebody in your generation could ask for the generation ahead that maybe you didn't know to ask early days? And any kind of thoughts about that communication from your side?
I love that question. I think one of the blessings of being a quote unquote second generation, right, is that you have something that you're stepping into, right? There's, it implies that there's already some kind of foundation or structure that you're inheriting, right?
Right.
And that can be spiritually, that can be economically, right? Socially. That the challenge, I think, is that you're also inheriting some of those things, right? And how do you honor the legacy and the past and even the wishes of that generation? And yet, I think, it's a new day and age. There's times, I think, and we even felt this in 2018, 2019. Our business is now 3 times probably larger than when my dad ran it, right?
Wow.
And so even from a scope perspective, and then the AI world that we're living in technologically, the way in which he conducted business is a different environment than the way that we're conducting business. And we're, our risk tolerance, as I mentioned, what we're leaning into, those are different things. So I think the ability to communicate through those things, and I think I probably didn't know how to ask some questions that really probably got to the heart of like what's really important to you. What are non-negotiables or things that are important to you versus what are things that you want me to have kind of creative license and room to run in. I think I kind of saw that as almost an all or nothing, and was confused about what those two buckets look like. And I probably wish someone would have, I think that's ultimately where I got with the coaching was how do we preserve and hang on to the things that are transcendent, I guess, to say it another way,
Yeah.
and then the things where you go, hey, this is you. Ultimately, we got to the point where I actually, we went through a formal buyout back in the end of 21. And I think that, to that point of I was driving his Ferrari, ultimately for that Ferrari to become mine, right? And go, okay, now I feel the weight and the burden of this. And, it's the classic, everybody thinks they can lead better, right? Everybody goes, well, if I were president, I'd be so good at this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the dog catches the car with the car analogy, right?
That's exactly right. And then the moment you're in that seat, you go, oh, baby, this is way tougher than
Right.
I thought, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's the other thing is just there's, you're young and you think, oh, I've got this figured out and I can do it better. And you have all those ideas and, that's the way it should be, I think. But at the same time, there's coaching and there's wisdom. And so how do you thread the needle on what are the things we want to carry and where can you grow? And then when you're in the seat, it's now for real. So I that's what I appreciate about my dad is we've gone through that process. He is still, fiercely on my team and cheering me and open, but he's also given me now the space to run with it and to be the leader. And I think that's also paid off. So I appreciate that from him.
So good. All right, let's flip the tables. What do you, that might be the same stuff, but what would you say to the generation ahead of you that's trying to hand things off to the next gen? What are some things that you think they should bring up, to make that easier, that handoff easier?
Yeah, I think ultimately as the second gen, you're also, you're not in the control seat, right? In a lot of ways. And so I think the process, the communication, I think that's theirs to ultimately, what I've watched and noticed is, and I've been around a lot of second, third gen type people, right, is they feel like that's a topic that needs addressed, but the first generation doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I think I don't, I haven't been on that other side yet in total, but I understand that's a scary thing and maybe you don't want to give it up, whatever those things are. But I think my encouragement to those first gen type folks or the people passing it down is that, that second gen or next gen is feeling that and probably sooner than you think. And I think to have those conversations, to go find a third party, to go find best practice, I think in my dad's mind, it kind of meant, oh, that means that I'm done and I have to get out of the way. And,
Right.
now we're consummating this. And I think best practice, the transition is way more of a journey than an action, right?
Yes.
It's not like, if we have this conversation about the future, it somehow means I'm done and I'm out. And I think to make it smooth, there's so many facets to it that you've got to think about it ahead of time. There's financial implications. That was one of the big challenges for us is when we started to do it, my dad said, we're going to put a debt load on the business and it's really going to hamper kind of the future for a while, right? And so there's real financial and business strategy implications because of this dynamic. So I just would encourage, I think, that first generation to not be afraid of the conversation and to lean into it.
You're right on the money. I'm thinking of a situation right now. One of the clients at Arcos that multi-generational deal, and actually I can think of a bunch of stories where the generation behind or generations is desperate for communication from the generation ahead. There's just some things that you feel weird asking. And sometimes when you ask, the answers really aren't forthcoming.
Right.
And so I think I think you said it very eloquently, leading some of that communication. I mean, relationships are all about communication, right? All relationships, spousal, with your kids, like I think a lot of us assume our kids, our peers, our coworkers, our spouses know what we're thinking, and they don't, you know. And so I think it does. I think your encouragement to lead that communication, and if you're struggling on how to do it, to get a third party to help you, which is probably pretty dang common that you don't know how to do it well.
Yes.
Getting help with it, man. Just like
Because most people have never done it. I think as a point of reference too, I'm in a CEO forum group with 8 people, 6 of which are family business. I would say I have the second best transition story. The one that I think is better than mine is second to third generation. So they had the first to second kind of pain point. And so
right,
they had learned the lessons, they'd been on
right,
both sides. And I think generally speaking, I've seen that to be way more smooth if you can get to the second to third.
right. That's the hard thing is getting to number three,
Is
right?
getting to that. The challenge is those other 4 below me, they are so bad that I don't think it would be an overstretch to say that they generally have said, if I could go back and not join the business, I would.
Yeah.
They're like so fundamentally devastating to
Yes.
them, their future, their family, because even my dad and I had that point, right, where it was like, is this business going to be the thing that separates us?
Right. Should
And
we
the
chuck
whole reason
it?
I was here,
Yeah.
I didn't care about the business. I wanted to hang out with my dad. I cared about the
Exactly.
relationship, right?
Exactly.
And just how terrible that the business is what separates and splits fathers and sons and fathers and daughters, mothers and kids. That's not where it is, but unfortunately I think that is probably more the norm
It is
than the exception, which man, you just want to avoid that at all cost.
such a good point that to acknowledge that. Let's just go back to any relationship that's lacking communication, is doomed to fail. It just is,
Yep.
right? So how do you foster the communication? If you don't know how to do it, you got to get help to foster it, and don't think that's weird, because without it, you really if you don't have the succession set up and communicated and everybody's on board, it's going to be a mess. We see it with estates all the time. Somebody dies, and the business usually dies with them because of a lack of communication on all these things in preparation. And it's hard work, and it's working on the business, not in it. And working in it is more fun, I think.
That's right.
Most
Well,
of
and I
us.
think, especially back to what we said earlier, that if it's truly a business that is 100% business and 100% ministry, right? Even more is on the line, and you for sure don't want to see that destroyed because of a lack of healthy relationship.
Great point. So if your business is doing great ministry, also doing great business and great ministry all together, what a shame. Not just to lose the business, which any secular business could lose just by lack of communication, but what a double shame from a stewardship perspective as a believer to have something lose the ministry opportunity as well. That's really, and it bears out in the statistics. All the studies we read, it's literally 9 out of 10 businesses fail by the third generation, and none of this. And then all the inheritance is gone and all that. And it really has nothing to do with the X's and O's of the estate planning documents. It's literally like 98% of the time that failure is because of a lack of communication. So you're right on the money, and it's hard work, but it's definitely worth it. So Anyway, I just really appreciate this conversation. I think this is the real stuff that doesn't get talked about that much. So I really appreciate your sharing with us. So as we kind of move to the end, as you know, you've already done a great job. I'm kind of hammering you on all these practical tips, and you've done a great job thinking about it and sharing your wisdom and experience. But I'm just thinking about somebody who's sort of in your shoes, maybe, or it doesn't matter what generation they're in. And so kind of whatever profile comes to your mind, if you're trying to just drop a breadcrumb for somebody behind you on this journey, what's just a practical tip they might think about trying to implement, in the next couple of days to kind of move in a healthier direction with this business as ministry idea?
So both our businesses actually have manufacturing plants inside of state prisons here in Kansas, maximum security, medium security prisons. And if I can just probably tell a little bit of story and compare and contrast with that, I think what's interesting is you see it very clearly that the incarceration of those men, it strips them of everything, right? Their name, they're now a number, their dignity, their family, their voice. And I think my experience has been is that you see all that firsthand, and we think about those guys as losing all those things. On the other hand, though, when you walk outside the prison walls, you see a world that's no different, right? I think the way in which the world operates in a non-spiritual capacity is set up to destroy you of everything. Your name, your dignity, your family, your voice. And so it's, the message to the guys in the prison is no different than the message to our team members outside the prison and all those outside the prison, right? Is that you're made in the image of God, and that you have dignity, and with that dignity and that image of God comes calling. And I think we confuse, and we don't know how to understand what that means. And I think the general calling to follow Jesus is the most important thing. But I think specifically within that, right, it's why was Austin Ochs created, and what does God have in mind for me, and what is he speaking and leading me into? And if that's not the starting place, I think ultimately you lose everything. You lose your dignity, and you lose your image of God and your calling, just like the guys in the prison do. And so I think what we see is the men in the prison, they find that message that they are more than what they've done. And we are too, right? On our worst days. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty rough. So calling is really important. So I think my encouragement to everybody is, number one, you've got to be tapped into a purpose that's greater than yourself. And our world will destroy you if you don't, right? And then in that becomes a lot of joy and passion for the mission and the calling that God gives you. And so I don't think you've got to have a certain job. You don't have to be CEO. You don't have to run a business in a prison. Wherever you are, God wants you, but he needs all of you. And we often say that our vision is to run a world-class triple bottom line company where we create economic and social and spiritual capital in our business and through our business. But the reality is we can't do that without what we call world-class triple bottom line people, right? And so I just think at the end of the day, when you humble yourself before God and you listen for his voice, I think that's the most transformative thing. And very simple and probably very textbook from the Bible perspective, but it's like we were talking about, you can have the manual, but you've got to live it out every day, right? And therein lies the challenges through the ups and downs of life and the ups and downs of relationships. I think people always lament, man, I just wish the Bible would tell me what to do. And I think that's the whole point, right? That the God is there wanting to speak to you and wanting to give you direction today if you would just listen and respond. And I think one of my friends told me a quote, which I often say, a little goes a long ways and nothing goes even further, right? If you don't do anything, the pain of regret is so large, right? And so the pain of taking one step today in the right direction, man, those steps add up over time, and you make progress. So my encouragement, I think, to everybody is put your eyes on the Lord, right? Put your hand on the plow and make the next step.
Yeah, I love this. You remember the Purpose-Driven Life book, and the first line, yeah, I think it's one of the greatest first lines of a book ever. It's not about you, and I just think that's exactly right. You got to get your worldview right. Keep seeking, humble yourself, keep asking God. You were saying, why was Austin Ochs made? Keep asking God that, and ask other people. What do you see in me? I'm trying to work on my, one-line mission statement or whatever, and I think sometimes it takes some of your friends and family and peers to kind of help you think through those things that you do so naturally, and to find that purpose, and then hold on to that. Everything else kind of drops below the line. So kind of working on your faith and listening to God about what your purpose is.
Yeah, life is a great adventure with the Lord, right? And I think if we lean into that, it's the ride that you always wanted.
Yeah, I was talking to my daughter today about just this topic earlier today, about we tend to have these preconceived notions, at least I did, of how I wanted things to go in my flesh. And it took me a long time to kind of give those up, because I was afraid God was going to send me to Africa or someplace I didn't want to go,
Right.
And then when you finally get to a faith point where you're like, clearly I'm not doing a good job in charge. Okay. I'm giving it to you, God. Just do it. Okay. He wants things that you can't even imagine for you. So his ways are just higher and better. And so trusting that, get to a place of trusting that, and then following that, well, it doesn't get any better. I mean, it's way better than whatever you could create in your own brain. At least I could. So I love it, man. Start with the purpose. Austin, can't thank you enough for sharing your story and your wisdom with us today, bud.
Great to be with you, Jeff, and blessings to everybody who's listening.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.